something happened at a public speaking event that nobody in mainstream media thought you needed to see. Jim Caviezel, the man who physically hung on a cross for Mel Gibson's film, the man who was struck by actual lightning mid-scene and kept going, the man who has spent the last decade standing in front of cameras, in front of live audiences, in front of anyone who would listen, describing in explicit detail what happens inside child trafficking networks based on federal evidence, based on conversations with agents who spent their careers in that darkness. That man stopped mid-sentence, and he broke down. Not for the cameras, not for applause, in the quiet, private, collapsed way that only happens when something you desperately hoped wasn't true turns out to be worse than you imagined. And what broke him wasn't a theory, it wasn't a rumor, it was a federal purchase order.
You get indicted for trafficking, and then you order 6 drums of sulfuric acid right away. Are you really worried about your reverse osmosis plant right after you get indicted? I feel like you're going to jail.
If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's...
That's Joe Rogan, a man who walked into this conversation as a skeptic, a man who spent the first 20 minutes of that podcast actively hunting for the innocent explanation, and then ran out of road.
It looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
It's probably a duck.
5 words. And in those 5 words, you can hear something shift. Now, here's the piece nobody is connecting. The acid, the island, the coded emails that a sitting United States Congresswoman cannot explain on the congressional record. The 85,000 children who crossed the border and disappeared into a system with no verified destination. And 2 men, one who was struck by lightning and kept filming, one who watched Hollywood systematically try to bury a film about saving children, both staring at the same federal documents and arriving at the same conclusion.
It looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
It's probably a duck.
Mel Gibson didn't react with confusion when he saw those documents. He reacted with recognition. This is that story. Stay with me. Before you can understand why Jim Caviezel broke down in tears, you have to understand who Jim Caviezel is, because this is not a man who breaks easily. This is a man who signed on to play Jesus Christ in one of the most physically punishing film productions in Hollywood history. A man who submitted himself to hypothermia, to open heart surgery complications, to the kind of physical and psychological pressure that would end most careers before the first frame was shot. And then, during the filming of the crucifixion scene, one of the most iconic moments in modern cinema, he was struck by lightning, real lightning, on set, while nailed to a cross.
Went through hypothermia. I had to have open heart surgery. I was electrocuted, struck by lightning. I understand the necessity of what I was going to have to go through could help bring people back to God.
He kept filming. That is the kind of man we are talking about. Someone who does not turn away from suffering because it is uncomfortable. Someone who does not quit because the cost gets too high. And critically, someone whose entire spiritual and moral framework is built around the idea that the most important things are always the hardest things to do. So when that man, 20 years after the lightning strike, 20 years after the Passion of the Christ, changed the cultural conversation about faith and sacrifice, when that man stops mid-sentence at a speaking event and cannot continue because he is weeping, people who know him pay attention, because Jim Caviezel does not break, except he did. And the question is, what exactly he was looking at when it happened. Here is the part that makes what happened at that speaking event so significant. Jim Caviezel did not come to the story recently. He didn't stumble across a viral tweet, do a quick Google search, and start making claims. He has spent the better part of a decade quietly at first, then louder, then in every available public forum describing in specific operational detail what happens inside child networks, not theoretically, not abstractly, based on documented operations, based on evidence he reviewed while preparing for and promoting Sound of Freedom, based on direct conversations with federal agents who spent their careers in this specific darkness, who came home to their families and could not unsee what they had spent their professional lives looking at. And for years, the mainstream response was identical every single time. Dismiss, label, isolate, conspiracy theorist, religious fanatic, a washed-up actor chasing relevance, the same machinery that gets applied to anyone who tries to bring this conversation into the open. And it worked. For a long time it worked. Because when the loudest voices in the room call you crazy, most people don't look at what you're pointing at. They look at you, but something shifted in 2024. The Epstein files started unsealing, not in fragments, not selectively. Court documents started becoming public record in ways that made ignoring them structurally difficult. And suddenly the things Jim Caviezel had been saying in interviews that weren't theories anymore. They were court records.
At the emails that have been widely circulated pertaining to the age 11, and I have it written down on my notes, the permission to kill email, the Snow White, the littlest girl was naughty, etc. And some of them pertaining to, jerky, whatever that is. Yeah.
That is a sitting United States Congresswoman on the congressional record, reading from the unsealed Epstein files, unable to explain what she is reading, unable to explain the language, unable to make the coded words resolve into anything innocent. And that moment, that specific moment of a government official, not a podcaster, not an activist, not a conspiracy forum standing in an official chamber and reading coded communications she cannot decode, is the moment the wall between fringe theory and federal reality started cracking for good. Caviezel had been pointing at this exact wall for a decade, and now it had a crack in it that everyone could see. Now we get to the document, because the congressional testimony, as significant as it is not what broke Jim Caviezel. The Epstein files unsealing, as culturally important as that moment was, is not what stopped him mid-sentence and brought him to tears. What broke him was one specific piece of the federal record, a purchase order, 6 drums of sulfuric acid, 55 gallons each, totaling 330 gallons, ordered for delivery to Little St. James Island, Jeffrey Epstein's private island, ordered not before his indictment, not routinely, as part of a long pattern of similar purchases that would suggest legitimate, ongoing infrastructure maintenance, ordered immediately after the indictment. Now, here is where Joe Rogan's intellectual journey becomes essential context, because Rogan, who is not easily rattled, who has sat across from war veterans and former intelligence operatives, and people who have seen the absolute worst of human behavior, Rogan actually went looking for the innocent explanation when this purchase order surfaced. He didn't jump to conclusions. He did what a rational skeptic does. He found the counter-argument and held it seriously. Epstein's island had a desalination plant, a reverse osmosis water treatment system. Sulfuric acid is legitimately used in the maintenance of such systems. It is not an exotic chemical. It has real, documented industrial applications. Rogan entertained that explanation, sincerely entertained it.
That's why I just go with grain of salt. This is just a plausible answer. I don't know that it is the answer. It could even be wrong.
That is intellectual honesty. That is the standard that this conversation deserves, and Rogan applied it. And then the counter-explanation collapsed, not because someone argued it away, not because someone presented a competing theory, because the context surrounding the purchase order makes the innocent explanation structurally impossible to sustain, because the innocent explanation has one requirement: routine. If sulfuric acid is being ordered for legitimate water treatment maintenance on an island that has always had a desalination system, there should be a pattern. There should be a history of similar orders going back years, consistent with the normal operational demands of that kind of infrastructure. The purchase should be unremarkable, because it should be one of many.
Was there orders for sulfuric acid before this? If they do have a water treatment plant, how does sulfuric acid play into water treatment?
There it is. That is the question that changes everything, because the order appears after the indictment, not before, not routinely, after. And Rogan, the skeptic, the man who told his audience not to jump to the worst conclusion, who genuinely tried to find the charitable reading of this document, landed here.
It looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck. It's probably a duck.
It's probably a duck.
6 drums of sulfuric acid, 330 gallons, ordered to a private island, immediately following a federal indictment for sex trafficking. When Jim Caviezel saw that purchase order, when he connected that data point to everything else he already knew, to everything the federal agents he'd spoken to had described, to everything the coded emails were pointing toward, his reaction was not confusion. It was confirmation of his worst fears. And it broke him. Witnesses at the speaking event where Caviezel broke down described the moment with a specific, consistent detail that makes it impossible to dismiss as performance. He stopped mid-sentence. He wasn't making a dramatic point. He wasn't building to an emotional crescendo for an audience. He was mid-thought, mid-sentence, in the middle of describing what these documents represent in practical human terms, and he stopped, struggled to continue, and wept. Not for the statistics, not for the legal framework, not for the political implications, for the faces, for the specific children, not abstract numbers in a federal report, not case files with redacted names, but individual children whose cases will never be solved, whose families will never have answers, because there is nothing left to find. That is what 6 drums of sulfuric acid means when you already know what happened on that island, when you've already spent a decade reviewing evidence of how these networks operate, when you've already had the conversations with the agents who spent their careers trying to track what happens to the children who disappear into these systems. The acid isn't just a suspicious purchase order. The acid is an explanation for why so many of the missing children stay missing. And Caviezel, who does not quit, who was struck by lightning and kept filming, who has been carrying the weight of this knowledge for 10 years, finally felt the full weight of it land, because the evidence didn't surprise him. That's what made it so devastating. It confirmed him. Now let's talk about Mel Gibson, because his reaction to the acid disposal allegations is a separate and equally significant piece of this story. Gibson and Caviezel have history that goes beyond professional collaboration. The Passion of the Christ wasn't a film for these two men. It was a mission, and the price they both paid for making it, the career consequences. The media targeting, the systematic blacklisting from the same Hollywood institutions they had previously been celebrated by followed them for decades. Gibson watched his friend get called insane for years. He watched Jim Caviezel stand up in front of cameras and describe what he'd seen in federal evidence, describe what federal agents had told him about how these networks operate, and he watched the media machinery reduce that man to a punchline: conspiracy theorist, religious extremist, irrelevant, and Gibson, who had his own experience with what happens when you publicly challenge the power structures that Hollywood is built on. Gibson paid attention. Sources close to both men describe Gibson's reaction to the acid disposal claims as immediate and visceral, not shock. Something worse than shock: recognition. Because Gibson has been saying for years in interviews that mainstream outlets refuse to air, in conversations that never get the distribution they deserve, that Hollywood does not operate the way the public believes it does, that the same power structures that tried to bury the Passion of the Christ, that blacklisted both of them for careers worth of damage, are not separate from the power structures that protected Jeffrey Epstein. They are the same structure. And then consider what happened to Sound of Freedom, a film about a real federal agent rescuing children from a real network, based on a real case, completed and then blocked.
Was told from Rupert Murdoch, from Fox, to every studio, look, if you touch this thing, you will be out, you will be done. You'll be finished.
A film about saving children, blocked by every major studio for 5 years. The same studios whose parent companies own the networks not covering the Epstein files. The same networks that gave 3 paragraphs to the U.S. Marshals rescuing 72 children across 4 states. Gibson sees the acid disposal claims as the final piece, not the starting point of a theory, the confirmation of a conclusion he had already arrived at through a different route. The cover-up isn't just about reputation management. It isn't just about legal exposure. It is about elimination. Evidence destroyed at the molecular level, because evidence doesn't disappear through legal maneuvering or media silence alone. Sometimes it disappears the other way. And when Gibson made that connection, when the acid purchase order became legible through the framework he had already built, the reaction wasn't outrage. It was the quiet, controlled fury of a man who has been right about something terrible for a very long time, and finally has the proof in his hands. Here's what Caviezel, Gibson, and Joe Rogan are all looking at when they say the system was designed to be invisible, because the acid is one data point. The coded emails are another, but together they point to something larger, an architecture that was not accidentally hard to trace. It was engineered to be untraceable. Start with the communication system.
They'll hit send, but they have passwords for multiple emails, and they'll just go in, get the message, and then never open or close it, so it's impossible basically to track.
No sent messages, no received messages, no metadata trail, no record of transmission. A draft sitting in a shared inbox, multiple people accessing it through a shared password, reading and leaving without ever triggering the surveillance architecture that monitors sent and received communications. This method has been documented in terrorism investigations, in organized crime cases across multiple continents. It exploits a structural gap in how electronic surveillance is legally constructed. Surveillance tools are built to catch communications that move. A draft that never moves is functionally invisible to standard monitoring. That is not paranoia. That is documented federal investigation material. Layer that on top of the coded language.
Jojo is here and will walk the jerky over to Jeffrey. He said he has 6 bags of it in a downstairs freezer. Steve needs a 6 to 8 ounce portion of jerky.
No, this is clearly a code. Well, walking over beef jerky.
Read those back. Why does beef jerky need to be walked to someone? Why does it require a cold, insulated bag? Why is it stored in a downstairs freezer in 6-bag quantities and then rationed in specific ounce portions? Why is its movement coordinated with visits to a private island? Rogan's podcast spent significant time trying to make beef jerky make sense as beef jerky. It kept failing.
And so just quick follow, what is jerky? Like, what is that exactly?
I think that's the question. I don't know if it's like, and again, like going into specifically just based on what this is, I don't know.
It's a code
the
word.
Context
It
is
has to be a code word. Nobody
It's a
talks
code
about
word
jerky
and
like
it's
this.
Weird. Yeah, it's a code word.
And it is not just Rogan's instinct. Return to the Congresswoman on the congressional record, an elected official reading from unsealed federal documents.
It's an 8-armed octopus. And if you take just out, that arm will grow back. You have to take that.
A member of Congress, on the record, saying what Rogan said on his podcast and what Caviezel has been saying at speaking events for years. Nobody talks about beef jerky like this. Now, layer on the geography: private islands, private planes, flight logs that read like a directory of the most powerful people in entertainment, politics, and finance. A private island with no public surveillance infrastructure, a communication system specifically engineered to leave no trace, a chemical capable of eliminating biological evidence ordered in industrial quantities immediately after a federal indictment.
She met Harvey with Oprah.
With Oprah.
With Oprah. So Katie, and she talks about this in an interview, and you know, before the trial, during the trial, we'll play the whole interview. She talks about the fact that if Oprah's with Harvey, then why should I worry about it? I mean, Oprah is the world's mom.
Take down one arm and another grows. The machine doesn't protect itself through some vast coordinated conspiracy. It protects itself through something simpler and far more effective: complicity, proximity, a social architecture that makes predators look safe because the right people are standing next to them. And that brings us to the name that keeps appearing in these documents. The name that connects to Harvey Weinstein, to John of God, to Diddy, and now 5 separate times to Jeffrey Epstein's files.
Where are the purchase orders for all of that sulfuric acid before then? Oh, no, I just want to put sulfuric acid into my swimming pool. Muriatic acid.
Well, that's the question. Was there orders for sulfuric acid before this?
That is a victim, describing how she walked toward a predator because Oprah Winfrey was standing on his arm, the world's mom, the most trusted woman in America for 40 years. Her presence didn't just suggest safety, it manufactured it. And after Weinstein's exposure, after John of God, after Diddy's investigation, after 5 documented appearances in the Epstein files, the pattern is identical every single time. Proximity, validation, silence, rebrand, philanthropy. This is the architecture that Caviezel and Gibson are looking at. This is the architecture that made Joe Rogan go from skeptic to silent to shaken in real time on his own podcast. Joe Rogan is not easy to shock. That is important context. He has interviewed war veterans, former CIA operatives, scientists, comedians who have processed the absolute worst of human experience through laughter. He has sat across from people whose stories would break most people and walked away steady. He does not rattle easily. And yet, there is a specific moment, documented on tape, where you can watch Joe Rogan's reasonable skepticism run completely out of road. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, the way most real realizations happen in the space between one sentence and the next. The sulfuric acid has an explanation. He granted it. The desalination plant is real. The chemistry is valid. He held the counter-argument seriously. And then someone asked the one question the innocent explanation cannot survive. Where are the prior purchase orders?
We were talking about on the podcast the 39 or 35 kids that were rescued in Georgia.
Yeah.
And it was a blip in the news. But meanwhile, I saw 1,000 articles on how mean Ellen is.
The crack, because routine means pattern. And there is no pattern. There is one order after an indictment. And Rogan, the guy who told everyone not to jump to the worst conclusion, arrives at the worst conclusion because the evidence leaves him nowhere else to go. Then his team pulls a real U.S. Marshals report during the recording. Not a fringe website, not an anonymous source. The United States Marshal Service. 72 missing children rescued across Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, and Georgia within a matter of weeks. And Rogan's reaction is not outrage. It is something quieter and more devastating than outrage.
How many of the kids that are being human trafficked actually get discovered? We're finding this 5 here, 6 here. These,
but how many actually are there?
How many of them actually are there? Do we know? We don't, right?
We don't.
How? That single word. How is 72 children rescued by federal law enforcement a blip? How does that story not lead every broadcast in the country? How does something that significant get buried under coverage of whether a daytime talk show host was unpleasant to her production staff?
It's terrifying. It's terrifying for fathers and mothers.
Yeah, it is.
You know, it's like the fact that, or brothers and sisters, the fact that it could be someone close to you.
Yeah.
We don't know. That phrase lands differently once you understand the architecture, once you know about the draft folder communication system, once you know about the coded language in the emails, once you know about the sulfuric acid ordered to a private island after a indictment. Once you understand that the system was built from the ground up to leave no trace, the children who aren't being found on purpose. Rogan, who started this conversation looking for the innocent explanation, is now a father sitting with that knowledge and unable to find his way around it.
So when you have 85,000 unaccompanied minors showing up in the last 2 years, being let into the country without the sponsor being vetted, DNA checked, background checked. I call it the economy of pedophilia.
That's not analysis. That's a father talking, and it connects directly to what Mel Gibson and Jim Caviezel have both said repeatedly. This is not a movie. This is not entertainment. This is happening right now. 72 children. That is the number from the U.S. Marshals operation that Joe Rogan described as a blip, a number that should have led every news broadcast in the country for a week, a number that got 3 paragraphs. But 72 is not the number that reframes the entire conversation. The number that does that is 85,000. That is the approximate number of unaccompanied minors who crossed the U.S. southern border during a recent 2-year period and were released into the country, no confirmed safe destination on record, no DNA verification, no background checks on the sponsors who claimed them, some of them under 5 years old. Under 5. Released into the hands of adults who were not verified through any meaningful vetting process into a country with no confirmed location waiting for them.
85,000 children crossed the border this last year and disappeared. Where did they disappear?
Tim Ballard, a man who spent 12 years inside the federal government specifically tracking child exploitation. Not a commentator, not a theorist. Someone who worked this from inside the system. Someone who knows what the numbers mean in operational terms.
Why is this not a bigger story in mainstream news? This is one of the things that concerns me. I don't understand why you're not seeing this on CNN.
Where did they disappear to? Now, take what you know about the architecture, the draft folder communication system, the coded language, the private islands with no surveillance infrastructure, the network specifically designed to leave no trace, the chemical capable of destroying biological evidence ordered in industrial quantities to a private island after a and ask that question again. Where did they disappear to? And the media, which found wall-to-wall coverage for celebrity feuds, for Twitter drama, for whether a talk show host was unkind to her staff, gave this number a paragraph, maybe 2.
Not very much has been. Attention has been given by mainstream media. Oftentimes it's more innocent than cynical, perhaps, where it's just, this is too dark. I don't want to expose our audience to this horrific.
Why? Tim Ballard gave 2 answers when Jordan Peterson pressed him directly.
There's a more cynical answer to your question, which may be there's people that don't want this exposed because they're involved in it.
The charitable version, too dark, too uncomfortable. An editorial decision made out of protection for the audience, not out of complicity. And then there's the other version.
He was told from Rupert Murdoch, from Fox, to every studio, look, if you touch this thing, you will be out, you will be done.
Too dark or complicit. Joe Rogan, who started this entire conversation looking for innocent explanations, who held the charitable version of the sulfuric acid story seriously before the evidence forced him to abandon it, ran out of road for the charitable version of the media's silence too. And this is where the Sound of Freedom story becomes more than a footnote, a film about a real federal agent rescuing real children from a real trafficking network, completed, finished, ready for distribution, and then blocked by every major studio for 5 years.
So right now, and the world, when they see this, they're being reawakened because the media has lied too many times. And this is the strand that broke the camel's back.
The same studios whose parent companies own the networks that aren't covering the Epstein files. The same networks that gave 3 paragraphs to the Marshals rescuing 72 children. The same media ecosystem that has collectively decided that 85,000 unaccounted for children is less important than celebrity drama.
I believe it's going to move a lot of whistleblowers come forward, but not one. In the hundreds, maybe thousands of them worldwide start coming forward and telling the truth of what's really going on.
The strand that broke the camel's back. And Caviezel, who has been saying for years that he believes this moment is coming, has been specific about what he thinks it looks like.
I mean, I have 9 children. At the time, I left the government at 6. And so I can always identify the age of a child with one of my own children. And what my mind was almost automatically doing is I would superimpose my own children's faces and persons onto these children. And that led to the PTSD.
Hundreds, thousands, worldwide. And here is what gives that claim structural weight rather than just sentiment. Tim Ballard stayed in the field for 12 years, not because it was sustainable, the PTSD alone, the psychological weight of what he reviewed daily, the way his mind would automatically superimpose his own children's faces onto the children in the evidence.
With your eyes, and you're with your maker, you've passed through this life and you're talking to your maker, and he has 2 questions for you. 1, could you have saved the kids? And 2, did you do it?
That is the price of looking directly at this. That is what happens when you stop treating it as an abstract problem and start treating it as what it actually is, children. Specific children, with faces that look like faces, you know. And the thing that kept him going, the thing that kept him in the field through 12 years of that was a question. His wife's question. Could you have saved the kids? Did you do it? None of this is hidden. It is sitting in the open. And the question Tim Ballard's wife asked, the question that kept a federal agent in the field through 12 years of psychological devastation, is the question this video is asking you right now. Could you do something with this information? Will you? Share this. Talk about it. Look up the documents. Read the court records. Watch the congressional testimony. Pay attention to the local U.S. Marshals reports that get 3 paragraphs. Because the conversation that should be happening on every major news network is happening in places like this instead. And the only way the dam breaks all the way, the only way the hundreds and thousands of whistleblowers Caviezel believes are coming actually feel safe enough to come forward is if the public already knows enough to receive what they say. Jim Caviezel broke down in tears. Mel Gibson recognized what he was looking at. Joe Rogan ran out of innocent explanations. Now so do you.